Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our next series in our virtual town halls. Today we have Congressman Kelly Armstrong. I'm Luke Hellier with the Coalition for Secure Energy Future, and you also have Jason Bohr from the Lignite Energy Council. Feel free at any time to pop a question in either the chat function or the question function, or if you happen to be listening on your phone instead of on the computer, feel free to send me an email. LUKEHELLIER @gmail.com. And that way we can go through all the questions and have some going at the same time. So I will now turn it over to Jason, and feel free to pop in with any questions through the chat box.
Sounds good. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Congressman Armstrong, for joining us. We've done a couple of these over the last few weeks and months. They're extremely helpful to our members. And it's one of the things that I think is helpful during this pandemic is to keep those lines of communication open with our elected officials. We can't go back to DC very easily and drop in, but having you on board really helps us stay informed about what is truly happening on the ground in Washington, DC. Just for those folks on the webinar with us, we've had Congressman Armstrong now representing us for some time. It's been an interesting road being in the minority. I'm sure would like to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that, what you're looking to once you are in the majority. But again, a little bit about Kelly. Grew up in Western North Dakota. If you look at the history of their business, it's grown. It includes a lot of the core industries in North Dakota, the energy side, the ag side, other businesses. And he's just a success story for North Dakota. He's a success story to send to Washington, D.C. and talk about where the proper role of government is. What are you looking for out of the government to help a state, an individual, a family, a community be successful? So anyway, Congressman, thank you for joining us. If you'd like to kick it off with any opening comments, we'd be glad to hear from you before the questions kick in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I would, and the easiest and the way these things tend to be the best for feedback from the people who are participating is to start with the questions as soon as possible, because I'd rather talk about what you all want to talk about than what I want to talk about. But just from a high level, I got elected in 2018. I serve on 3 committees in Congress. I serve on Judiciary, Oversight, and what is called the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. So if you want to talk about the partisanship in DC, I'm kind of right in the middle of it. I always explain those committees as if they're talking about it on cable news at 7 o'clock, I was in the hearing in the morning. That being said, I mean, we still work towards obviously dealing with issues that are important to North Dakota and working forward. But I mean, even prior to the pandemic, DC is not a great functional place right now. I think we all know that. I will tell you there are a lot more rank and file members on both sides of the aisles that do work towards some solutions. 60% of our bills still pass, and they pass bipartisan. It's really the bigger ticket items that truly turn into what I think, I mean, these toxic political fights that people see every day. Unfortunately, as you get closer to an election, this usually gets more political. And if you use your figureheads of the party as President Trump and Speaker Pelosi, I think that amps it up to about 1,000. So we deal with those issues. I think the Postal Office is a perfect example of that. I serve on the Committee of Jurisdiction in the Post Office. That's the Oversight Reform Committee. We are getting called back to vote on a bill to give them $25 billion on Saturday. They already have $15 billion cash on hand. They have $10 billion from the last CARES package that they haven't touched. This has really turned into a political issue that is, and tried to make it an acute issue when it's really been a chronic issue. The post office lost over $70 billion since 2007. It's something that's important to me from North Dakota because I actually disagree with some of my Republican colleagues. I think privatization would be a disaster for states like North Dakota. So, and by the way, this transcends me and this transcends politics. Senator Hoeven and Senator Heitkamp have been working on this for years. Chairman Cummings, before he died, and Mark Meadows were the 2 spearheads of this and actually worked very closely with each other. But as all things in the Trump-Pelosi area, the Trump-Pelosi time, we will escalate everything to plaid and act like it just happened last week. And that is what is going on. And it's really unfortunate because none of what we're doing now will fix the long-term systemic problems with the post office, which we need to fix to ensure we're getting mail in some of our smaller communities. And it's not the Beulahs, the Hazens of the world, it's the Dodges of the world, right? I mean, it's these places where we rely on this more and more. And if you privatized it, it just the service. I mean, if there's no money in it, why would a private company deliver to Dodge? So we have to figure out a long-term solution to it. And unfortunately, it's being heightened into a short-term political fight. But overall, I think the best message I always carry to DC is the things we do in North Dakota not only are important to us, but they're important to everybody else. We produce a lot of the things the world needs. We produce a lot of energy. We produce a lot of food. We're a big reason why the United States is food and energy secure. That's an incredible geopolitical and strategic advantage as we continue to move into the 21st century. Only a town as crazy as DC would take that geopolitical advantage and turn it into a negative. And I think more so than any industry in the world, coal is a perfect example of that, right? We take short-term arguments because they fit a narrative, and we don't recognize the historic struggles that have existed, not caused because it's any more expensive to dig coal from the ground and produce energy from it, but because of the regulatory environment that has existed. And oftentimes the regulatory environment actually outpaced the technology available to comply with it, right? So you deal with that historic volume, then you also have to recognize that the political push towards renewables and the changing goalposts, where now apparently there are people who think renewables are baseload, and also the depressed price and the abundance of natural gas. So you have a lot of different factors that come into play, but we have to recognize that we believe in private property rights, we believe in landowner rights, but we also believe in the resiliency and reliability of the grid. And that is a longer conversation we don't have. And we don't have to go very far back, and we don't have to go very far west, because I will show you, I mean, we have brownouts going on in California right now, and everybody's pointing fingers at everybody about what the brownouts are for, but I have a pretty good idea. I think we'll figure it out when we do, because they have too many sources of energy that they're trying to use as base load that aren't base load. And that is something that we have to get better at explaining to people all across the country, because just to be frank, coal is no longer a bipartisan issue. It's just not.
Yep.
Over the last 20 years, if you go to the number of people who represent coal in DC, you're going to be very hard pressed, particularly in the House. Now in the Senate, we still have a couple, but in the House, you're going to have a hard time finding Democrats in coal country. And that is just, that's because, it's the changing nature of our politics. It's the changing nature of the dynamic as it talks about how we produce and provide energy in the 21st century. And we need to be aware of it, because it's not only important to the industry, but it's important to communities like Beulah, Hazen, Washburn, Bismarck, Mandan. We forget that. And it's really important to our way of life and how we continue to move forward. But more importantly than that, every model that exists, whether it's California or Germany, recognizes that baseload power and what we consider baseload power hasn't changed even as the politics have changed. And I think fundamentally what has changed over the last several years is we are good at outsourcing our guilt. If we shut down every coal plant in North Dakota tomorrow, the world will burn more coal next week. And it will for sure burn more coal next year. But if we're not burning it here, apparently that makes it better. And that goes for investing in these infrastructure projects. That goes for a lot of different things. If we chase American investors away from overseas coal plants in developing countries in China, it doesn't mean they're not going to get built. It means they're going to be built by somebody who doesn't rely on our shareholders hold our companies to a particular level of environmental stewardship, regardless of what the local conditions are. That isn't the same for the other countries who are building these things. It's just not. And when you view those things and deal with it, and I'll just give you a really relevant example that happened recently. Our last full committee hearing in oversight was the devastating health impacts of climate change. Well, outside of democracy, I don't think there's a single thing that has lifted more people out of poverty than cheap and reliable energy. So we don't talk about it in a global perspective. We talk about it in a political perspective, because at the end of the day, the Green New Deal is about winning elections, and it's not about saving the planet. And so those are the fights we have every day. I'm proud to do it. I enjoy doing it. I thank you for having me. And I could filibuster this for the whole hour if you wanted, but I'd rather start answering questions.
Well, here's one to get you going, because it actually plays off your comments about the post office. So when I was in DC, my boss was on oversight and judiciary, fighting similar battles, right? But what you learn about the post office, you made the point, the free market might not be the best way to solve that problem. What a lot of people don't understand is electricity markets are not necessarily free markets either, due to the investment and whatnot. And so they're managed, and they're managed by policies. And those policies try to approximate a free market, but it's just not well suited for that. And you were right in the middle of that conversation at the energy town hall that you did last week. And just your brief thoughts on what you heard, what you learned, and what you saw at that energy.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start first, Jason, with, you know what, and GRE is a private company, and and co-ops, and they have members who, and all of those things. So I mean, always have to start with, they are a private business that is allowed to do what they do. But from a policy standpoint, you have to start talking about the resiliency and reliability of the grid. And from the more political standpoint, when you're having these town halls, you better recognize that this is historic, it's generational, it's very, very emotional to people. And so when county commissions like Mercer County are doing what they're doing, or McLean County is doing what they're doing, I don't think anybody in those counties and anybody in those elected offices cares what somebody who doesn't live there thinks they should be doing right now. It doesn't matter if it's me. It doesn't matter if it's it doesn't matter if it's the Ag Commission. It doesn't matter who it is, right? They answer to their constituents. And it's important because regardless of how, just when you want to talk about an economic development for a rural wind farm in western Mercer County, that doesn't account for the three of who traditionally year in and year out have been rated some of the best small cities in the entire country, that cease to exist in the same way they exist now if coal can't survive through this process. So I think you need to start there. And I think one of the things that's been frustrating for me with this, not so much in the business sector, but more in the lobbying and the politicization of this, is the condescending tone people take about it. Like whether it's somebody writing an article in the New Yorker, or it's somebody coming in and trying to honestly say you can replace the jobs we have there with green jobs over the long term, because that's not true. It's just not. It doesn't exist. That's not the way these communities work, and that's not the way they've survived for a long time. So then what do we do as government? In some ways you have to be very, very careful, right? I think my role in government is to help facilitate conversations, ensure we have ways to do this. But you still need a willing buyer and a willing seller. And you need those two things. What we can do is say, hey, listen, if you are running into federal problems with effectuating that purchase or that sale because of timelines on regulatory things, whether it's MISO, FERC, different areas, hoops that somebody's not willing to jump through because they can't get any confirmation, that's where we come in, right? We come in and say, if we get to a position where these things get protected and we have a way to do this and effectuate some kind of transition that keeps that open, keeps these communities thriving, my job is to make sure I can do whatever I can with the regulatory environment to effectuate that and make that not be the reason it falls apart. But I don't think anybody, I've been in government either at the state or the federal level since 2012. And I don't think having a whole bunch of politicians sitting around trying to effectuate a sale between a private buyer and a private seller ever has accomplished nearly what we would like to think it does. So we can do that. We can promote the industry. We can promote our way of life, and we can ensure people that we will go to bat for them in order to help deal with that if there are federal backstops on that. But I think generally overall, we have to get better at this. I'm from my state Senate district was rural district in District 36. We have the oil and the gas industry. We have an ethanol plant in Richardson. We have the first small refinery permitted in the United States since 1976, which is converting to biodiesel. We grow all the small grains. We have a thriving livestock industry, which is where the ethanol plant sells their feedstock. And if you count Brady 1 and Brady 2, we have the biggest wind farm in North Dakota. Republicans mean all of the above energy. The problem is our friends on the environmental left mean all of the above as long as it's solar and wind and nothing else. And so when we talk about that, we need to talk about it. And we also have to talk about fairness in competitive pricing and competitive things. All of the above does not mean renewables can sell their energy onto the grid for cheaper than it costs to produce. Because anybody who's ever taken an economics class will understand that that is not all of the above, because the market is finite and where that exists. And the other thing we don't talk enough about is how we allow primacy on the grid and the competitive disadvantages that put coal at. Because regardless, for as cheap and reliable as producing coal energy is, what you can't do is stop and start very quickly. So and that is one of the areas where natural gas can really do a good job of competing in that space. And then the other answer is talking to our friends in similar industries and recognize a short-term competitive advantage for you is probably still not in your long-term best interest. Because if there's one thing I've learned in this business my whole life, they're coming for you next. It doesn't matter who you is, they're coming for you next. So being able to make sure that we don't get bifurcated, people who have the ultimate end use in sight don't end up getting bifurcated from each other in order to compete in a short-term marketplace.
Yeah, I get frustrated sometimes with the nuclear folks who tout themselves as clean energy. At the same time, they're just banking that environmentalists won't go after them for their waste, which is next on their agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and everybody has different issues, right? Coal has its, I mean, coal is, 5 years ago, natural gas was the bridge fuel. Now they don't like natural gas either. I mean, they just don't. I mean, look at the pipeline shutout down in New York. Look at Duke and Dominion. I mean, look at these, every Democrat in the U.S. House voted to ban LNG by rail. I mean, so that's exactly right. Now, I always make a joke, but it's only part of a joke. The problem with nuclear is the Simpsons ruined nuclear. I mean, pop culture has really caused the problem. Look what happened in North Dakota when we thought about drilling a hole just to see if sometime in the future we could store it there. You know, coal elicits a very, very significant political reaction. Nuclear elicits a very emotional reaction that crosses the spectrums. But the reality of no matter where you're talking in carbon emission, or even you're talking in CO2 emissions, if you're not talking about carbon capture, you're not talking about natural gas, and you're not talking about small scale nuclear, you're not serious about the conversation. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah. We try and get people to, articulate what is your objective. If your objective is to clean up the environment, if your objective is truly about carbon dioxide, then all those things you mentioned absolutely have to be part of this.
Their objectives to win elections, and in doing that, they feed off Americans' ability to outsource their guilt. That's what their objective is. It's that simple.
Absolutely.
So
go ahead, Luke.
Okay, we've got our first question from the chat. The House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis released a 530-page multi-sector vision for U.S. climate policy designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Among other things, it calls for a federal clean energy standard to achieve net zero emissions in the electricity sector by 2040. Joe Biden's platform calls for net zero in the electric sector by 2035, which is 5 years sooner. If the U.S. Senate flips and Joe Biden is elected, what do you think will move forward from a legislative perspective?
Do we have the filibuster or not?
Yeah, probably not.
It's a huge question, right? It's a huge question, and we should be terrified of it and we don't have to go very far. Germany started their clean power plan 13 years ago. They have the highest electric rates of any civilized country in the world. They've abandoned a lot of what they originally started. So you know what ends up happening? People who have the responsibility of governing learn that this is completely impossible to do. The problem is they learn it's impossible to do after they've fundamentally and completely altered our way of life here. So we use everything we have in the arsenal. We sue, 10th Amendment cases, regulatory cases, all of the same things that our friends on the environmental left have gotten so good at. But the reality is you can't do it. You cannot do it. Not without increasing the cost. But here's the thing. The biggest cost increase on this is on the working poor and the lower middle class. And the reason is just to be frank, rich people can afford the increased cost in energy, and the poorest among us don't pay for it. That's the way our system works. So it is really a tax on the middle class and the lower middle class. And there is no absolute way to do it without that. But the other answer is that nobody will have a conversation about, and I made it, I don't know how many minutes I got in before I'm talking about rare earth metals. And we have to have the conversation. 7 pounds of lithium for one Tesla battery. 1% of our fleet right now is electric. By moving that to 10%, even on any modest goal, there aren't enough of these things being produced in the world to supply that supply chain. They just don't exist now. And we produce exactly 0 of them here. It's actually one of the areas where I think the coal industry is going to evolve in the 21st century. And do you guys know anybody about making a profit out of the dirt better than you guys historically? There are this stuff isn't necessarily rare, but it's very chemically intensive to produce. But the same things that stop a pipeline in Montana or stop a pipeline in Minnesota will be exactly what we end up with in trying to get a rare earth metal mine permitted. There will be environmental suit, there will be environmental suit, there will be environmental suit. That is what happens in the United States when you try and do infrastructure like this. So until we figure that out, or until technology invents itself on how to store that energy, coal and natural gas and nuclear are going to be a part of our energy grid. And if you're going to move towards 0 emissions, then you better not be forcing them to pay for their carbon capture, again, which means you have more of a federal government financial interest in doing this, which brings with it more regulation. Because otherwise we can't compete, they will shut down, places will cease to exist, and 3 years later, the responsible people on the other side of the aisle will go, oh no, what do we do now? And that is the reality of where we're heading. So we have to be better at that conversation. We have to be better at explaining how that doesn't work. But the problem is for a big portion of them, it's not that the science doesn't matter, the facts don't matter, the economics don't matter. It is a purely emotional argument so it's very difficult to talk to them. So we have to talk to the reasonable ones. But the reasonable ones are so scared of 4 Twitter accounts that they hide under their desk. And we have to figure out how to capture those people who actually understand this. Do you think, and I just say him by name because he's never going to listen to this, do you think Joe Manchin doesn't understand this stuff? Because he does, right? Senator Heitkamp understood this stuff when she was our senator. The problem is we need more people on the other side to stand up and hold the more irrational members of their party accountable for the crazy stuff they're talking about.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That report was a staff report written by a bunch of DC staffers who have never lived anywhere that's produced anything a day in their life. So I actually have a funny story about that. Garrett Graves is the ranking member on the committee, and Chairwoman Castor, who's a very nice lady, and I get along with her a lot. I think she's very misguided on energy. Dangerously so, but I get along with her. So she reached out to all of our offices to meet with us, and I scheduled a meeting with her. And I had already had the meeting, and Garrett Graves reached out and said, hey, just so you're aware, they're going to try and make this sound really bipartisan, but it's just not going to be. The chair, Jason, you know this, chairs and ranking member and staff have been going back and forth for a long time before they get to just the lowly general population of the committee. And so I had to respond to Garrett and said, yeah, I know that, but I already met with her. And he's like, why? I go, because I wanted Chairwoman Castor to sit on my desk for an hour under a painting of an oil well.
I like that.
Go ahead, Luke.
Well, no, go ahead. I was just gonna
say, your point about outsourcing guilt, it's already being seen in the rare earth elements and the electric vehicles, and it works for us to outsource that guilt when our need is only 1% of transportation. Right, because those rare earth elements, the lithium mines of South America, of Asia, are not nearly as environmentally sustainable as what we could do here. But one of the things that you're aware of, in our industry, we're actively pursuing rare earth elements. One of the fears is the minute somebody announces a significant investment in a rare earth element, that then China undercuts the market. So one of the things that we at least are targeting is procurement requirements or a price floor when those things are being targeted as national security or military priorities. So I don't imagine that would get a lot of play in the House in this environment, but it's just something that if you're hearing part of that conversation, that's one of the things that keeps it from developing commercial, or could keep it from developing commercial.
Yeah, I mean, there's the sue and settle environmentalists, right? They don't have to win any of these cases. They don't like any infrastructure. They don't like pipelines. They don't like rail. They don't like highways. They don't like transmission lines. They don't like anything. But I think actually where you crack this as we move forward, Jason, is exactly that. Because not only are rare earth metals needed for things we use every day, if we're going to start moving towards this, and we're going to, right? Because consumers are going to demand it. I mean, eventually, I mean, you know, the problem with the consumer market, particularly in energy, is they're demanding something without any actual knowledge of how it works. But how it gets cracked is DOD. I mean, because all of these rare earth metals are also needed for things that are very, very important to our national security, as in missile guidance. I mean, lots and lots of things. But I mean, and this isn't just capacity either. Cobalt, 85% of the cobalt in the world comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's mined by 7-year-old slaves. We don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with that. I mean, the two rivers for single-use plastics are both in the Eastern Hemisphere. Where do you think most of that plastic comes from? I mean, it comes from us. We have to be more realistic about these conversations. We have to continue to deal it. But, I mean, for me, it's easy. Refine and simplify the permitting process. And that doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're trying to build a highway or trying to build a rare earth metal mine. We have to get better at the federal permitting process for two reasons. One, access to capital. If it takes you 10 years to build a highway, it's very difficult to maintain that access to capital. If 3 years after a pipeline is running, a judge can shut it down, very difficult to get access to the next access to capital for the next pipeline, combined with investment bankers and brokers who are all under the age of 30 and pushing their own investments away from carbon and those types of things. These are serious things that are going on all around our industry. So, but one thing we can really do, and President Trump has been really good at, is reducing the time and the volume of the regulation that is required, because two things happen there, right? The longer it takes, the harder it is to capitalize it. And the more volume there is, there's more things to sue on. So getting an EIS report down from 450 pages to 200 pages is a huge deal. It doesn't make the environment any less safe, but that's 250 less pages an environmental lawyer gets to go through to find something to sue on. And we have, I mean, the plaintiffs in these cases are different all over the country, but the lawyers are the same, and they're getting better at it. And they have figured out that states have too much control over production, so they're going after transportation. And we better get better at it, or it's going to cause real infrastructure. In a country that used to be the best in the world at infrastructure, and I think we can honestly say we no longer are, this will make it, and part of that is this exact scenario. I mean, it's because whether it's a pipeline or rail or transmission line, it is almost impossible to get these infrastructure projects built in a timely way. And you're going to see more and more people abandon that part of the industry, which is essential when you're in the geographic center of North America.
So shifting gears just a little bit, you know, there's a lot of talk, obviously, about the PTC and last year getting extended again. And when I used to work in Congress, our joke was that extenders always get extended. But I wanted to get your take if you thought that was going to be on the table again at the end of the year, and if so, is there any talk about resiliency credits or something at the federal level to maybe level the playing field for coal against other resources, and maybe I hadn't thought about that.
I honestly think your best chance of leveling the playing field is going to be at the state level. Wyoming has done something, and I know that doesn't fit, at least under the current makeup of what's going on. I'll never vote for a bill with the PTC in it, extension. My question is if a deal was a deal and we would agree not to extend the PTC any longer in exchange for repower provisions, why aren't those back on the table too? I don't understand. I mean, I'm an old oil guy and trial lawyer. A deal's a deal. When you make a deal, it's a deal. You don't keep getting to change the end game. And because it's not just to protect one particular industry. Again, this goes to protecting how we continue to provide energy to people all across the country. And we need to start having those conversations. And we need more honest accounting for what this looks like once those production tax credits go away, because that's the other thing we never talk about. We don't talk about what energy costs look like once they actually go away, particularly if the market space shrinks and there's less diverse ways to deal with that. We also don't talk about what the energy market looks like if natural gas spikes, because it's an internationally traded commodity. I've been in that industry my whole life, and here's the one thing I can tell you about any of them: they don't always stay cheap, and they don't always stay expensive. It doesn't matter if it's oil, our gas, our cows, our corn, our soybeans, or anything. Right. And we've been through 10 years of a fairly low price in oil and natural gas, but that isn't going to extend forever. So we should be more adamant. I understand what happened because of how it happened in the last extension, but we can't let that happen again. We just can't, because once it's there, getting rid of it's almost impossible. And I applaud Senator Kramer and Senator Hoeven for doing it. It's just, I don't know how you would think, and even if they could get that through the Senate, and if anybody could, it'd be those two, is dead on arrival under the current makeup of the House. There's just I can't imagine a negotiated scenario where the environmental left would allow that to get through. So we have to fight for the things that keep our energy grid as diverse and secure as possible. But Wyoming's done some creative things. We have the abilities to do some creative things. The PSC cares about baseload. It's important to them. Look what we saw over the last decade in Western North Dakota and just the absolute thirst for power. And hopefully, if all things go well, that'll come back.
Yeah. Well, I think you had mentioned this earlier. I think finally, or at least maybe, the fact that you have 3 million homes in California in the middle of rolling blackouts because the California grid decided to make different changes over the last 10 years than maybe what SPP or MISO is, that hopefully, people can use as an example, in that, resiliency and reliability really matter.
And interconnectivity and interconnectivity and modernization of the grid, it should be something everybody cares about. The problem is with my colleagues, particularly on the environment or on the committee, they want, the grid is designed to take power. They don't care where they take it from, right? Other policies determine that. But my friends on the left want to prioritize different power sources on the grid, which will absolutely have the opposite effect of reliability. And also, it's fascinating to me how many people are so passionate about this issue that don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just people on the street in California. I mean members of Congress.
Yeah,
it certainly is very accurate.
The farther they are away from it, the less they understand it.
You guys have all heard me say the problem in Congress is too many people think food comes from the grocery store, gas comes from the gas pump, and electricity comes from the light socket. But it's terrifyingly true.
Yeah. Well, and you see firsthand that in the climate subcommittee. And what we see with Joe Biden releasing the energy platform, the whole convention going on, this is a question that came in. What is the relationship between Joe Biden's energy policy and the Green New Deal? Is it really as one-to-one as people are saying on social media?
So here would be my concern. He picked the one person who has actively advocated against production agriculture to write his energy policy, and that's Representative Ocasio-Cortez. We're not even talking about coal. We're not talking about oil. We're not talking about natural gas. We're talking about production agriculture. I mean, the policies of the environmental left hurt agriculture too, but they usually don't say that quiet part out loud. Well, she's actually doing it, right? And everybody was all excited because they didn't ban fracking in their plan. Well, that's because they want to win Pennsylvania. It has nothing to do with that. And I think there's a real conversation to have, right? Typically, the presidential candidate for your party is the leader of your party. But I think it's fair to say Joe Biden isn't so much the leader of the Democratic Party right now as a figurehead. And I mean, I don't mean that for political spite. I just think that's accurate. Which is why I think this maybe more so than any other time in history, some of the vice president's policies may be something we want to talk about. Because that typically with the vice presidential pick, it lasts for about a week, and all the insiders who follow this stuff every day get ginned up, and then it doesn't matter moving forward. I mean, I love Brent Sanford to death, but I don't think a lot of people voted in the governor's race because Brent Sanford was on the ticket, right? And I mean, and I think that's you can equate that to vice presidential picks. I think right now we should be a little more concerned about that. And so, yeah, I think you should be concerned about who they tap to write their environmental policy. And I think you should be concerned about who they tap and the things that have been said from the vice presidential candidate on what they believe energy is. And the reason is because they don't like what we do here. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. They don't like how we live. They don't like how we recreate. They don't like what we produce. I mean, they use it all, but they just don't like it. And it's fundamentally going to be a challenge moving forward, and we better be ready for a fight.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting observation you make about Joe Biden being that relationship with the leader of the party, because I never thought of it that way, but it's very true. One chat question came in, obviously paying attention to what's going on in North Dakota politics, but this initiated measure business, when you start talking about who is leading the thoughts in a party or in a state, this initiated measure seems to be coming from outside of our borders. I know that you're up to speed on this. Tell the folks that are listening in why this matters and what it's truly about.
Sure. And this isn't the first time it's happened, right? And I've opposed them all. I mean, I opposed Marcy's law. I opposed the Ethics Commission. But this one is far and away the most dangerous thing. It's North Dakota Measure 3, constitutional measure. It's the most dangerous thing that's been on our ballot in my entire time involved in politics in North Dakota. And it has 5 separate things. And they start with the 2 that pull test well, making it easier for our overseas military to vote. As a state party chair, I'm uniquely situated to answer this, Jason. I served in the state Senate. I was state party chair for 3 years, and now I'm a at-large member of the House. So when it comes to elections and ballot access in North Dakota, I feel pretty comfortable talking about this. Yeah. Our veterans are allowed to vote 46 days prior to the election, the same as everybody else, but they can request their ballot at any time. It's never been an issue. I have talked to our military personnel. It has never been raised a single time. The difference is when you're trying to get somebody to sign a petition, you tell them it's good for veterans and they say yes. So they're using it because they know it pulls at the heartstrings, but it is absolutely a solution in search of a problem. We have the easiest ballot access of any state in the country. We have the easiest voting of any state in the country. We have the easiest absentee balloting and voting of any state in the country. And so then the second one is requiring paper backup for all elections. Well, we already do that in North Dakota and have done it forever. We don't need that in our Constitution. But then you move into what I think are the more insidious ones, and that is allowing the Ethics Commission to redistrict and splitting our House districts in 2. Now, it's important to remember when you're doing that, I've never heard that as a complaint. I mean, I've heard a lot of complaints about the state legislature. I've been in the state legislature, but I have never heard, hey, the problem is they just live too far away. It's not a conversation that's occurred in North Dakota. And the other thing you got to remember is compared to other states, we're already overrepresented. South Dakota's 30 and 60, Wyoming's 30 and 70. I might have those 2 switched around. Nebraska's unicameral with 49. Alaska's 20 and 40. And Wyoming and Montana, who is over twice as large as us in landmass and has almost double our population, is 50 and 100. North Dakota is not underrepresented. We just simply are. And you should allow, we're a citizen legislature. Our legislators have to go back in their communities and work every 2 years and deal with this. This is not a career politicians thing. You should have your elected officials drawing these lines and not unelected bureaucrats. That's just the reality of it. And that is so that part of it. But then you really get into the two things that are really, really, really dangerous. It would take away partisan. It would essentially take away district state party conventions, because 4 people move on from the primary to the general. Nonpartisan, the top 4 move on. It's called a jungle primary. It's the same thing they do in California. But I will just ask anybody on this call, when is the last time? And then once you get there, you have what is called ranked choice voting. So these two things, when you combine them with each other, are very, very dangerous. And what I mean by that is, when is the last? They say it will increase competition, but it just won't. You want to increase competition in the legislative races? Make it full-time and pay them like everybody else does. But I don't think anybody in North Dakota wants that. We love our citizen legislature. We do. But how this would work is the top 4 advance from the primary to the general. And I can tell you, I have never seen 4 really good candidates for any one position in North Dakota in a very long time. So what does that mean? You have 2 candidates, two candidates that are good and 2 grievance candidates. And that's what I call them. They can be the far left, they can be the far right, but they're what I really call grievance candidates. So if you have 2 candidates moving forward and a socialist candidate on the left and a really hardcore grievance candidate on the right, and you go to your general election and it's the top two candidates get the most votes, but neither one of them gets above 50%, whoever voted for the socialist is going to determine who wins the election, because you drop the socialist off the ballot and then you take all those voters, you take their second choice. And then they count the votes again. And that is a terrible way to do public policy. We'd be the only state in the country that advances 4 from the primary to the general. And we'd be only the second state in the country that uses ranked choice voting for partisan elections. Except by the time, if this would pass, we'll be the only one, because Maine did it 2 years ago and they love it so much they're trying to repeal it. So it's 5 unrelated ballot measures, 99% funded by out-of-state special interests, Vote Fair, Smart Vote. These are national special interest groups that have figured out changing North Dakota's constitution is a cheap date. It costs them less money to change our constitution than it does to be on TV for 3 days in San Francisco. We're the only state without voter registration. We have more access to our elected officials than anybody. I know this because when I talk to people from all over the country, they're fascinated by this. I'm telling you, you have however many people on your phone are on this call, are listening in right now, it would probably take them 5 minutes to find my cell phone number. Like, that's legitimately true.
Yeah.
We like how we do things in North Dakota. Why would we ever allow out-of-state special interests to come change it? And the answer is they don't like how we elect our people. They don't like who we elect, and they don't like how we do business. But they can't win in a fair fight, so they're trying to change the rules. And I don't want to make it partisan, but it is ideological. They're anti-business. They're anti how we do things here, and they want to change it because they can't get inroads in a fair fight. It takes away one person, one vote, and it does it as a way. All you have to do is go look at the campaign finance disclosure, and the people who are funding this, go look at the other issues they fund. I'm telling you, they're not in our best interest, and we absolutely have to stand up and stop it. Because if we don't, they're going to continue to come year after year. Every 2 years, we are going to be fighting some national special interest group that's coming in and telling North Dakotans how to take care of North Dakota business. I'm offended by it. I'm offended by how they gather their signatures. I'm offended by the AstroTurf name of their organization and the AstroTurf token North Dakota people they have out promoting it, because it isn't North Dakota. You can tell by their talking points. Gerrymandering. We have one congressional district. I don't care how we pick the congressional district. Go look at a map of the North Dakota legislature and then go look at a map of North Carolina's and tell me where there's gerrymandering.
Yeah, Maryland.
I mean, the reality is, I mean, as often as not, given the current makeup, we put other Republicans in problems for redrawing lines as much as we do Democrats. And regardless of how you feel about what I'm saying, I don't think anybody said, you know, the problem is Republicans have just stacked the districts so much in their favor that Democrats can't win. Because I can tell you, if you're in Fargo and Grand Forks, you don't feel that way. I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, they're still competitive out there. The problem is in Western North Dakota, national Democratic policies have effectively chased away everybody that used to support those programs. And that's just the truth. So we should not allow these guys here. It's unbelievably serious. This is something you probably aren't going to hear from many elected officials who are on the ballot. We'd survive if I lost. I think I'm pretty cool, but I'm not necessarily essential to the functioning of the North Dakota Republic. I think I do a pretty good job. I hope you all do too. But if this passes, it will fundamentally alter North Dakota's election landscape, and it won't take 10 years. It'll happen in the very next election. It's dangerous, it's insidious, and it's being brought to you from prime time by the same people who want to shut down your industry and want to shut down our way of life. And there is no other way to say it.
Yeah. Well, appreciate you saying that and giving that explanation to our members.
Yeah, I'm actively, people might find when I'm running for re-election why I'm so actively against it. It's because it's the same reason I ran for office. I care about North Dakota a lot. Yeah. I care about what we do and how we do it. And this is just absolutely dangerous to our goal of letting North Dakotans determine North Dakota's future.
Well, you know what South Dakota did to get around a lot of those problems in the future is they put a residency requirement for signature gatherers in place. And so you can't bus in people to stand outside of Walmart who have never lived in the state.
We need to have a serious conversation about how easy it is to change the North Dakota Constitution. Initiated measures for statutory changes are part of the process, part of our heritage. We should also have an initiated measure ability to change the Constitution, but you shouldn't be able to stack 5 unrelated things in a conglomerate thing and allow it to come in and do this. And this goes a little bit to North Dakota. One of the best things about the oil boom was we got to brag about a lot of other things we did. We are not some sleepy little flyover state. We are an absolute economic powerhouse and incredibly important to so many different things that our country needs. We need to quit viewing it that way. We are not, the grassroots statutory measure things that come up are great. But the reality is over the next 20 years, that's not going to be the majority of what they are. Yeah. People, for $3 million, you can change the North Dakota Constitution, and we cannot allow that to continue to go. We have to talk about those guardrails. Doesn't mean we should get rid of it, but we should recognize there are people that don't like us that want to change how we do things, and it would be naive of us to think this isn't going to keep coming. So we have to have that conversation. But that conversation can start November 4th. Until November 4th, let's concentrate on beating Measure 3.
Very good. Hey, we've got about 10 minutes left, so as we wait for if we get a last question, let me give you one just about federal response to COVID pandemic issues. States have all approached it differently. There's been federal guidance and intervention. What do you see as pros and cons of just a federalism model as that you've learned through this crisis?
Yeah, so I've really pushed local control on how you handle this for a lot of different reasons. I'll start with when this all broke out. We have a really smart governor. Mayor of Grand Forks was a doctor. The mayor of Fargo was a doctor. I would way rather have our governor and those mayors making those determinations for those communities than any politician in DC or bureaucrat in DC. So I believe in that part of it. And then just from a more fundamental side point, I mean, as we've seen this evolve, I wouldn't ask the city of New York City to close down because we have an outbreak in Bismarck. And I don't think we should ask the city of Bismarck to close down because there's an outbreak in New York City. So as we move forward and deal with this, I think we have to have some of those serious conversations. And I think particularly as we keep evolving for it, we have to be able to react locally. That being said, I think one of the things we're not very, one, we can make anything partisan. We can make masks partisan, apparently. You know, if somebody showed me a study tomorrow that consumer confidence would go up 60% if everybody wore a mask, and that would get more people in my local restaurant, I'd tell everybody to wear them too. Regardless of what the science is on any of it and where you feel on that, I want our guys open for business. The problem is our North Dakota economy doesn't survive on North Dakota. We produce a lot of things we need the rest of the world to use. So we got to get a handle on the virus. We have to understand that we may be living with it for a while. We have to understand that the human condition, and particularly the US condition, we're the least collectivist society in the history of the world, which is a fantastic thing, is not going to lock ourselves in the basement for 18 months. And we have to deal with this in a reasonable and responsible manner. And I think how we handled it on the front end versus how we're handling it now, I think there's various degrees of different. And I think also there's no game plan for it, right? How we handled it right away is, I mean, different. We've never dealt with anything like this before. But how we handle it moving into the future has to deal with our society. This has never been about our economy versus our health. It's about our society versus our health. We need to be able to function in communities large and small all across this country. And we cannot essentially continue to create eminent domain on the entire economy for a virus that we are getting way better at treating, learning more about every day. And if you are a normal, healthy person, has been found to be a lot less deadly than we originally anticipated. That doesn't mean we can't figure out ways to protect the most vulnerable amongst us, because we have to. And I deal with this in my personal life. My son's 10, my daughter's 12, soccer, baseball. My grandmother lives 2 blocks from us, and I haven't seen her much since those sports have been going on. And that's a decision we make because she is in one of those categories that she could have problems. But some of the problems with the federalism part of this, and I understand why they did it, is the $600 backfill to unemployment. Right? The only way the federal government could deal with unemployment with 50 states with 50 different laws is to backfill it. While we have seen that, I mean, for people who have lost their jobs and people who have been furloughed and that, I mean, that is a lifeline. But as we continue to open our economy up, we have to figure out a way to get more guardrails on that. And whether that's allowing our governors to have more guardrails on that to deal with what the economies look like in these particular states, we have to be able to do that, because otherwise our economy is not going to open. And we can't have these packages continue to throw unfettered trillions of dollars at people and entire communities that incentivize them to stay shut down regardless of what the science on the ground says. And that's not just important for Houston, Texas, or Chicago, Illinois. It's important to North Dakota because we export a lot of products. Some things that I hope we figure out as we move out of this is, one, the federal government learned how to be more dynamic than we've seen before with the PPP program. Treasury, the SBA administration actually responded in real time to concerns on the ground as they were developing this program. I think everybody would understand the more dynamic the federal government and user-friendly it could be, the better it would be. And 2, I hope we continue to have serious conversations about our supply chain problems. And some of them obviously are China, some of them were Europe, some of them were Mexico, some of them were homegrown. Beef, cattle, that we have seen that industry, you know, consumers have too much beef, producers have too much beef, consumers can't get it on the shelves. And 4 companies control the midstream. We have to fix that. But how about a different product that we don't necessarily think of because we don't grow a lot of it in in North Dakota? Lettuce. We're not actually consuming less lettuce now than we were. It's just being consumed very differently. So you have producers of lettuce having their lettuce rot. Grocery stores can't get lettuce, but because we're no longer selling to restaurants, the supply chain is all messed up. So I think one of the exposures of COVID has been, you know, that midstream that doesn't produce the product and doesn't consume the product has significantly too much market control over that product. And we have to figure out a way moving forward. And that's great for local producers, right? If they have more local options to sell their products, that can increase competition in the marketplace, and it allows for less waste, and it allows for more. more dynamics in that chain. The problem you will find, and we will know this when we're coming through it, and it doesn't matter if it's pharmaceuticals or produce or whatever, the margins in the midstream are like Taco Bell. They don't make money. They make money on volume. So if you're selling eggs to a grocery store, you have exclusivity agreements, because otherwise you can't, otherwise your business model doesn't work. And when those exclusivity agreements don't fulfill the need at the end, then producers are destroying stuff on the front end. And so we are going to have to figure out a way to deal with those things. And that truly is a federal issue because it's interstate commerce, right? It's one of the areas where we should really have a federal, and this is going to take a real bipartisan task force, and hopefully it won't be partisan, because it's not, I mean, it's not truly a, I mean, Democratic districts in Iowa grow corn just like District 36 in North Dakota. So, I mean, this should be a way to deal with and sit down and look at the dynamics of our supply chain and figure out if there's ways where we can really improve it for both consumers and producers. And so that's one thing I hope as we come out of this, we really figure out a solution to.
So, got one question left that came in, and it's a good closing question.
Sure.
Elections coming up. What could we look for in Washington, D.C. between now and the election? Is anything really going to happen?
Sure. One thing's going to happen. Federal government funding ends September 27th. I don't think anybody wants to walk into an election year with a shutdown. So how that ties into a COVID package that gets done, I'm still hopeful we get some kind of skinny deal done. You know, there's a lot of standalone bills out there that protect particular industries. But typically from August to November in an election year, not a lot gets done anyway. Now, again, heighten that for where we're at. But also, we have to figure out a government funding bill. And also, this is when I would tell everybody to pay attention. The last time we had a continuing resolution, there was enough things thrown in that Christmas tree that were incredibly detrimental to things. I can't imagine a scenario where they'll put this bill together in a space where I would be comfortable voting for it. You know, it seems to be the one place we get bipartisan agreement. We'll spend a whole bunch of money because we have to keep the government open, but we'll also increase spending and add a whole bunch of things in there that have a long-term consequences because everybody knows we have to keep the government open. So that bill will get done. I think NDAA will come back out of conference and we'll fund the military. The reason I think is because it came out of committee, I think 55-0 or 54-1 in the House. Then it had a bunch of an en blanc amendment group that was all not military or military funding related put on. But then it'll go back to the Senate. I mean, we will get that bill done because that typically, the last one was really partisan, this one less so. So I think we'll get those two bills done. But then I think you're going to see escalating a lot of political issues, and you're going to see a lot of rhetoric moving between now and election day because, you know, I always tell people it's the most consequential election you've ever seen if you're on this call. I say it for different reasons, and it's because it's the only one left that you can affect the outcome of. Every other election's over, regardless of how it happened. This is the most important election in your lifetime because it's the only one that you can still effectuate. You can help determine the outcome. So you'll see a couple of those packages done, but I mean, you all know this if you're paying attention at all, even if you're not living under a rock, under another rock, under a rock, it's not a really functional place right now in DC. And so we'll get the big ticket things done, hopefully, that keep us functioning until after the election, but I'm not sure you're going to see a lot more happen.
Fair enough. Thank you. That concludes our time slot. And that was our last question that came up as well. So very much appreciate you being on. Thank you for all you do for the state, for the industry, representing us there. It's not easy. You do a great job for us. Thank you very much.
And I thank everybody for being on here. This is, I wish it was in person. I like those, but this is the best part of the job. I mean, everybody calls it August recess, but we seem to be working real hard, but we get to do it my favorite way, which is talking to North Dakota. So thanks for setting this up, and you all know if you need it, don't hesitate.
Thank you. Thank you very much.